There has long been a question of whether our extraterrestrial visitors have established complex undersea bases to use for their operations, as many witnesses have claimed to see UFOs both entering and emerging from our oceans. We present here two cases, both with quite sinister implications. The late UFO researcher Stanton Friedman was well aware of reports of unexplained underwater objects sighted by Navy submarines, submersible vessels travelling much faster than their own underwater. Other witnesses have observed UFOs descending into the sea, moving around, and then taking off from out of the water, alongside other reports of craft seen to simply burst forth from the water. Another researcher, Don Ledger, who had trained in marine navigational aids and radar, related speaking to a sonar technician on a naval base in Halifax, Canada. He worked as a repairman on Navy sonar and told Ledger of sometimes encountering an object that seems to be moving much too fast for a submarine, once having recorded one going at about 150 miles per hour underwater, an impossible speed. It had also been gauged as reaching an incredible depth of 2 miles, which is also way in excess of the capabilities of human-made submarines. The sonar repairman commented that it was amazing that they can withstand the pressure without killing the occupants, let alone handle the extremes of speed attained. Ledger speculated that the objects may be surrounded by an energy field that operates equally effectively both in the air and underwater. Human Zoo. In August 1956, Orlando George Ferraudy, then 18, was night fishing in a remote spot in Rio de la Plata, Argentina. At around 11:30 p.m, he heard someone approach behind him, whom he assumed was a homeless person, for whom he came stocked with cigarettes and food. However, the figure he turned to see shocked him. Similar to a human being, it was much taller than him, at least 2 meters in height, and dressed in a yellow or orange one-piece outfit, which gave off small sparks and ended in a hood that lay around its neck. The humanoid had very blonde, cropped hair, very pale skin, an athletic build, and amber eyes. It took Orlando by the arm and telepathically suggested that Orlando should remain calm and unafraid, as no evil would befall him and that they were embarking on a long journey. Orlando was instantly aware that the entity was not terrestrial and found that he had lost his will, that it was impossible to resist the being's mental commands. The being withdrew a device out of his suit that Orlando likened to a woman's makeup compact. The small device, which would cause him to feel faint whenever it was held up, released a very intense light, after which he saw a huge dark shadow emerging from the river, which was shaped like an inverted soup bowl and measured about 70 metres in diameter. A ramp suddenly protruded from within the craft, and then another similar being assisted Orlando in walking cautiously along the narrow metal gangplank over the water. Escorted by the two humanoids, he entered a small domed room with curved walls, from which the lighting emanated, and even the air seemed luminous. Also present in the room was a small girl who gave her name as Eleanor, her age 11 years. She informed him that she had been taken by the UFO from her home in Villa Mercedes, a city in the province of San Luis in Argentina. She also told Orlando not to be afraid, and that no harm would come to him. A tall blonde woman wearing a bodysuit similar to the male humanoids then entered the room. Orlando noted her page boy hairstyle and athletic build as she led Eleanor out of the room. One of the male beings then told him to remove his clothes, explaining that his garments would be contaminated and may cause the ETs problems due to their terrestrial bacteria and viruses. He took Orlando's clothes and placed them inside a bag, which was then tossed into a device resembling a television set. Upon being closed, the device became filled with thick greenish smoke, which the entity explained as a sterilisation process, after which his clothes would be returned. Meanwhile, he was handed a small garment measuring no longer than 30 centimetres. Orlando telepathically asked the being, "How do I put this on?" then found a small hole in the upper part of the garment and was astonished to see it stretch in order to fit his body perfectly. He related that it was impossible to feel the garment and that it gave him the sensation of wearing shoes, although he was not. The female entity then returned with Eleanor, clothed in a similar outfit. They were informed, always telepathically, that they would take a small journey, first underwater through the Bay of San Borondon and the Argentine Sea south of Buenos Aires. They would then cross over to Africa, from where they would go into space. The two humans were told that this was to avoid detection and be deemed hostile. The beings also disclosed that the UFO would generate a kind of particle field using electromagnetic energy for the craft's manoeuvres, both within the atmosphere and beyond it. After an astounding journey past planets, they re-entered Earth's atmosphere and plunged into the Caribbean Sea, south of the Gulf of Mexico. Seconds later, they arrived at what Orlando described as a giant underwater dome, a transparent structure covering some 5 or 6 hectares and surrounded by several craft. This underwater facility had the appearance of a giant igloo, which his alien hosts informed him was a maintenance station, a deep-sea base wherein they were able to recondition their ships. They also told him that genetic experiments had been conducted with humans in these facilities for thousands of years. Chillingly, they explained that the Earth was seen as a zoo-like planet by several other alien races inhabiting the universe. Even more strangely, all life on Earth was, in some way, a part of these genetic experiments, and in fact all had their origins on other worlds. Life Museum. Betty Andreasen Luca was a well-known abductee, a housewife, mother and grandmother who claimed to have been abducted many times since childhood, mainly by small grey aliens. She was the subject of much study and documentation, but one of her encounters in particular gives another bizarre insight into these reported UFO underwater bases. One of her early abductions, this experience took place in 1950 when Betty, aged 13, was taken from her home and found herself placed on a wheel-like craft that was able to fly of its own accord. In April 1980, her regression hypnosis sessions retrieved more of her buried memories, wherein she again reported being abducted into an alien craft but with a different outcome. Before she knew it, to her shock and surprise, the ship entered the waters somewhere off the coast of the United States. When she recalled the ship begin hurtling towards a large body of water, she became terrified that the craft was about to crash devastatingly into the depths, and became so alarmed that the hypnotist interrupted the session to enable her to calm down. When the revelation of this memory was resumed a few days later, Betty recounted the experience of the craft entering the water and being completely submerged beneath it. The vessel proceeded to enter inside a cave or tunnel which had walls of solid ice and hanging icicles throughout, leading into a large aquatic base. The underwater space was brightly lit, and Betty observed people whom she described as just like me moving around inside. What she next reported was astounding. Within this base, Betty witnessed what she described as apparently living people encased in the ice in a kind of display tableau. Each figure, representing a historical period, had his or her own scenery befitting their era and was wearing the appropriate costume. The humans looked neither dead, waxen or stuffed, included babies and children, and represented many different races, with other animal species also present. Betty, presumably with her childhood perceptions, repeatedly called the clothing funny and old-fashioned, and said that there were too many cubicles for her to count. The investigator conducting this particular regression session later said that he found his mind rebelling and unable to believe Betty's account. However, he wondered how Betty could spontaneously and authentically relive such detailed experiences unless they were true. UFO researcher and MUFON director Raymond Fowler later wrote that a cold chill coursed through his body when he heard Betty's description of the people and animals enclosed in glassy cubicles within the icy cavern. He suggested that she was privy to the aliens' Museum of Time. Others had speculated that they were profoundly and affectionately displaying specimens of their own creation, humankind in its cultural development. The underwater base aliens seemed to be the same beings as the more familiar airborne ones, with the same behavioural patterns of abducting certain favoured humans and subjecting them to frightening investigatory encounters. The motives at play here are hard to determine, whether pride, a clinical detachment, or even mockery at our primitive stage of evolution.